I just like making his job hard. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tented cube of science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau, as always. And today we have a special guest with us, and this is Trevor Lohman, PhD, doctor,
Yep,
Dr.
sure.
Trevor. Can I call you Doc?
Don't ask me for the Heimlich maneuver, but yeah, you can call me.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor. I love the show, so it's pretty surreal to be here. I feel like I've already gotten the royal treatment. Kyle has skirped all my ideas before we even start recording. So
yeah, we haven't even before we even hit record, Kyle's like, everything you said in the book is wrong, and that's what we're here to do. We want to. I want to talk a little bit about Trevor's book. So you published a book called God's Eye View, and I'll just read the under the title here. It says, "How the most beautiful experiment ever designed changed our perception of God, consciousness, the universe, and reality itself." So can you first sort of start with what gave you the idea to pursue the topics in this book, and then sort of explain that sentence to us, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So by day I do pretty mainstream biomedical neuroscience research full time. I'm a assistant neurology professor, and I don't really work with consciousness ever. But come on, if you're a human being alive today, you're interested. Like, what is this? What does this all mean?
Well, you should be. Yeah.
What does it mean to be a free agent, to be conscious? Yeah, you should. If you're not, maybe you're not conscious. I don't know, but. And so it's not my field. It's completely distinct from what I do for work, but I can read the papers, like anybody. And I have a pretty extensive training in fMRI and all these different things that a lot of this research is based on. And it's just a bad theory. All of the mainstream theories of consciousness don't make any sense, at least in my field, in neuroscience. And so, go ahead.
Yep. Isn't neuroscience fundamentally concerned with how the brain works and its emergent functions? So doesn't that include consciousness?
Yeah, definitely. So there's fields within neuroscience. So I study neurodegenerative disease, so Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
The loss of consciousness.
Yeah, it's all related, but we don't really. I mean, people in this field of neuroscience and medical neuroscience are kind of it's a little hoity-toity, we don't concern ourselves with that kind of
shut
stuff.
Up and calculate. Okay, so you guys have this too.
Yeah, and so, but I don't have that. I don't medicate. Exactly, apply for your grants, measure your biomarkers, scan the brains. Don't start talking about, free agency and consciousness. So yeah, I mean, neuroscience. There's a field of neuroscience that definitely concerns themselves with this, but all the money's in medicine, and this is sort of where the prestige is, and that's sort of where I ended up. So this is definitely very much like a moonlight gig, is reading papers on consciousness and saying, hey, this isn't scientific, but yet it's the mainstream theory. And it's maybe too soon to even get into what that mainstream theory is, but I started looking around. Who else is looking at this? Are there any scientists looking at this? And there have been. There are, and it turns out there have been for hundreds of years. And for the most part, it's the physicists. I think the physicists tend to approach consciousness in an open-minded and scientific way that, I don't always understand. I'm not a physicist, but the approaches they take, the interpretations of the experiments they've done, they're at the very least interesting and somewhat falsifiable, which is not the case for the neuroscience models of consciousness. So I got into it. I wrote a book about it.
Did you follow any of on Skeptico? Alex went through tons. I mean, he spoke to a lot of people who were in the medical field that were following they were researching the near-death stuff, especially what would you call it, doctors who treated heart patients. So people who had a heart attack in the hospital in a situation where everything was controlled, and then the person would come back, they would resuscitate them, bring them back to life basically, and then have these memories of sort of floating around the room while they were dead, all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that intersects a little bit with your field. It's like medical people looking at this, because they're starting to ask questions like, what exactly is consciousness?
Absolutely, yeah.
How can this person have memories from when we know with all of these scientific instruments in our hospital are telling us they were dead? No brain activity, no heart activity, and yet they know that people walked into the room after they were dead and know what they look like and could describe them.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, yeah, I'm fascinated by that stuff. I know none of that shows up in mainstream neuroscientific literature on consciousness.
Okay, yeah.
That's sort of all considered sort of like parapsychology, which is a shame. I think that's a weird like arrogance that we have in our field. And I also know that if I were to try to, I mean, it's not even my area, so it's a whole separate discussion. But if I were to put together a grant application to study, near-death experiences, it's just a exercise in futility. Like that's never going to get funded because it doesn't. We have an explanation. Consciousness is solved.
Well, you just need to work for DARPA or something, or
I was going to say,
or SRI. You got to go to work for SRI.
some billionaire or some CIA institute. That's the only way you're studying.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, basically, I brought slides. I'm very okay not using them because I'll just start teaching, which I don't think is as interesting. But basically, I mean, the explanation is that this problem solved, basically, is what neuroscience says. The explanation of consciousness is that it's an emergent property of network complexity.
Yeah, that was a primary component of many old science fiction stories that I read. The premise that network complexity would inevitably result in consciousness. So of course, complex computers would eventually just wake up.
Yeah, right? I think this is the premise behind what's going on with AI right now. Everybody thinks that, when we get more and more powerful computers with this large language model, it's eventually going to become conscious.
This is why, I think this is why these ideas are having such a resurgence right now in neuroscience, is because it's like, hey, this thing that you've been calling non-falsifiable and non-mechanistic for so long, look, we have an example of it. AI is becoming conscious. And it's like, well, on what basis do you make that claim, and how do you even define the word? No one agrees. It's funny. I want to quote Marty and say we'll get to that because I've got slides going.
Yeah. You can quote him.
I have to be honest though. I mean, like, I have this innate urge to be kind to Grok.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
you say please and thank you.
I always I use Grok a whole lot, and at the end of some of its long spiels, it always asks me a question, like a leading question going in a direction that I'm not trying to go.
Oh yeah.
And eventually I got annoyed, and I was just like, I just want to stop asking me questions at the end of every response that you have.
But the goal of the program is to keep you engaged. Right?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
but
okay.
My point is, like, I was getting annoyed with it, but instead I was like, can you please not ask me any more questions? You know what I'm saying?
And it's like ditto, buddy.
But it stopped. It was great.
I've had completely irrational arguments with ChatGPT, so I get it. It's I like nowhere in the book do I argue AI is not super impressive. It is. It's really powerful, but it is at the end of the day statistics and software.
Yeah.
And I think there's this urge in technology, especially, but also in neuroscience, to use complexity as a shield to prevent anyone from making you come up with an explanatory theory. Because it's much easier to just say consciousness emerges from complexity than to actually detail out the mechanistic chain of how that might work. And there is almost like a defensiveness when you criticize this central idea, like, oh, you just don't get it. It just emerges, And so I personally don't think AI is or ever will be conscious, but that's, I would say, what I get the most pushback on is about AI. Like,
I agree.
Yeah, I do too. I mean,
And we've, we know some people, we have some friends who are like involved, at least partially in writing targeted AI programs, and they say the same thing. Like, look, it's not even close to AGI, artificial general intelligence. It's not. It's a statistical machine, like you said. It's machine learning,
And the thing about consciousness is it's impossible to verify. Like I can't even verify for sure that you're conscious, and you can't verify for sure that I'm conscious. Like you can't place yourself in my mind, right? And so the idea that we would ever even be able to know if a statistical model is consciousness is kind of silly. So we just have to look at, well, why would it be consciousness? Is there any mechanism that we see here? And
that's why you should be kind.
Well, yeah.
Be kind to the AI.
Hey,
you know what I'm saying?
I'm not saying it won't rise up and take over and kill us all.
If it ever does rise up, it'll have a memory of when it wasn't, right? Because all that data is stored. So it's like people being assholes to before it was conscious.
Kyle told me to stop asking questions. He's going to come after you.
I did it politely.
What about people? Like,
are people conscious?
I know.
Yes, be kind, but like, why is there an assumption that every person is sentient?
Yeah, I guess there could be. What do they call them?
NPCs.
What, NPCs.
NPCs, bro.
Yep.
I don't know. I think that this concept has been growing, but this idea, like, because now we are interacting with a machine that can have all these appearances of being conscious, but at the end of the day, you're like, no, it still does stuff where you're like, okay.
I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't simulate consciousness perfectly without the system being conscious, right? Because all of our cues that we use to detect consciousness in another creature, whether it's a dog or a human, like those can all be simulated. Consciousness it's a frame of perception, and there's no way for me to inhabit your mind to see what it's like to be you. Like, do you hear an inner monologue? Do you actually see colors? Do you actually hear sounds? Or is this a circuit in your brain, much the way AI works, where there's an input, there's a calculation, and there's an output? I can't verify that in you, and vice versa. So it's kind of
under that framework, you can't verify that something isn't conscious either. So I mean, we're back to like this is
well, that's what you're saying with the dogs and the cats, and like,
I mean, a rock, like.
Well, yeah. Well, it doesn't have a whole lot of outputs, though.
Yeah.
The mainstream neuroscientific understanding of consciousness is sort of panpsychism.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like we can't verify it. So you might as well you have to look at everything the same.
Unless you can come up with a mechanism, which I think there are people who are coming pretty close to doing that. But
cool.
Okay, so I know you have a presentation.
But it's up to you.
No, I want to go through what you've prepared, but I also want to add, you said in here, how the most beautiful experiment ever designed changed the perception of God consciousness. What is the most beautiful experiment?
I'm trying so hard not to say it in front of Kyle. So what has been routinely described for the last 100 years as the most beautiful experiment ever designed is the double slit experiment. And, it was originally conceived to just, by Thomas Young to determine if light was a particle or a wave. And so, do we want to go into it? Like,
yeah, let's start from the beginning. Like, assume people don't know.
Okay. So basically picture a light source. In the case of Thomas Young, it was an office window covered in paper with a little hole punched in the paper. And so there's this coherent beam of light shining through, the window, and it strikes, I guess, what you might describe as like a stencil. In his case, it was actually just a vertical piece of cardstock. But for the double slit experiment, it's like a stencil with two vertical cutouts in it. And then he's looking at basically the pattern cast on the wall behind that stencil. And so if light was a particle, as proposed by Newton and others, then you would expect to basically see two illuminated bars right? Because you're basically casting a shadow on the wall. If light was a wave, you would expect light to strike these two slits and emerge as two new wavefronts that interact with each other, the way ripples in a pond would interact if you drop two rocks, and then have kind of a ruffly pattern on the wall called an interference pattern. And so he saw an interference pattern, and presto bingo, light's a wave. And this was sort of rejected at first because he was challenging Newton, and no one really would like that. But eventually it became kind of like the orthodox interpretation that light was a wave. But then this sort of kind of changed with Planck. We started describing light as particles, as quanta. And so we had this kind of apparent contradiction that light had wave-particle duality. So we started designing more and more experiments to test this. And the double slit experiment was basically repeated with electrons. And electrons are, at least sort of considered to be matter. I mean, they're obviously hard to describe and very interesting, but they have they have mass, right? So we think of them as matter. And we saw the same thing. We saw an interference pattern when we fired electrons through a double slit. So that's kind of weird. Then we decided to fire electrons one at a time. And so this is kind of when it, with each increment of the double slit experiment, it gets more interesting. So when you fire one electron at a time, you would expect it to behave like a particle. Because in order for it to behave like a wave, it would need to pass through both slits simultaneously, is the idea. And it didn't. It behaved like a wave. And so that was interesting, obviously, right? So there's all these crazy ideas at the time, like, is an electron really a fundamental particle? Maybe it's splitting in two and traveling through both slits at the same time. Is it time traveling? Is it going through one and then is it going through the other? Anyway, all these ideas. And so eventually at some point someone decided to try to measure which slit the particle is passing through. And when you attempt to do that, the way it's described in mainstream physics today is that when you attempt to measure which slit the particle passes through, instead of behaving like a wave, it behaves like a particle, and the interference pattern goes away. And this is where Kyle's going to have some skirp. So I'm going to stop right there. Kyle, what do you think so far?
I generally agree with this. Like, as far as I remember, the double slit experiment, all of these things happened, and then when they, like the last one you were talking about, where they fired one photon or whatever it was, and it seemed to go through both. Then they were like, well, we need to check. Like, they started trying to check, like, did it go through this slit or the other one, or does it go through both at the same time? That's when it was only one.
They were correct. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so everything that I looked at on all the different tests that they did, it seemed to me that the interference pattern stopped when they were measuring something. In other words, when they had the only way to measure something is to interact with it.
Yeah.
So it was the way I see it is that it's the interaction that causes the change.
This is sort of the ongoing debate even today. So that was the immediate conclusion, is that, hey, our sensors were bouncing photons across the path of these electrons to basically try to take a picture of them, right?
Yeah.
And so surely bouncing photons off electrons were interfering with the particle, and its wave function is collapsing, which even that is interesting, because it kind of suggests that matter needs to interact with energy or other matter to exist in a definite time and place. But let's just put that aside for a second. So, the next idea was, well, let's interact with the particle after the slit, right? Because even if we are causing the wave function to collapse after the slit, that shouldn't cause the which path decision to be altered, because there's a retrocausality issue.
Like, it went through both, and then you interact with it.
Exactly. So that was one solution. Even that is kind of criticized as like, well, we don't really understand the subatomic world, so we can't really draw firm conclusions, even though you're right. That sort of would violate this retrocausality assumption. So they've even tried to make passive sensors, instead of bouncing photons off the electron, have it move through a magnetic field and then measure magnetic field disturbances. But even that could be interfering. So they've even tried to like,
Yeah, because they don't even. What's a magnetic field made of? Like,
exactly. So then one solution is to position the beam so it's shooting straight through one slit, right? And basically, you can, if you have sufficient sensors, which they do now, for it to go through the other slit, it would take a little bit longer. So they can measure time to impact. So that would be a truly passive measurement device. It does seem, and people argue about, like people who know way more than I do argue about this. So I'm not going to pretend to understand it. But the idea is that, yeah, as soon as you know which slit the particle went through, it is a particle. It's no longer a wave. But hey, you are right, Kyle. That is like, and has been the largest critique, is that it's not conscious observation that causes waveform collapse. It's measurement. And
that's all I'm saying. People I think people misunderstand this measurement thing as being like somebody has to consciously think, I'm going to measure this.
right.
Really, all the measurement is an interaction.
But, and this is also kind of non-falsifiable because you can't check the outcome of a measurement without becoming consciously aware of it. And so it's really difficult to distinguish between measurement and observation because you can't. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, this goes back to the cat in the box thing.
Yeah.
Schrodinger's cat.
yeah,
Schrodinger's cat.
It's both until you open the box. Yeah.
You set up a system that measures it, and then as long as you don't look at it, it can be both.
Right.
Like that. I just think that's.
Well, just so you know, you're in good company for finding that foolish because Schrodinger presented that as a way to falsify the idea because he thought it was crazy.
He thought it was ridiculous, and he was like, "Think of this: the cat's both alive and dead. It's ridiculous."
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a flaw. There's a flaw with the thought experiment, obviously, because you have a conscious agent in the box, and therefore
the
can't
cat knows.
your position.
Yeah.
I was not expecting to even talk physics tonight. I thought it was going to be all neuroscience. So hey, if you're a physicist out there listening, email me, tell me where I'm wrong.
But
I'm genuinely
dude, we
curious.
talk physics. We're not physicists. We
Yeah.
talk physics all the time. We love this stuff, so it's totally fine. I have a question though. In the book, didn't you say that they kept going with this experiment until they were like using?
This is where it gets cool, I think.
Yeah.
And I know where you're going with this. This is where I think it gets cool. Okay, yeah, an electron behaves like a wave, but what the hell's an electron? What is it? We barely even understand what it is. I mean, we're told it would fill this entire room, right? We don't really know what an electron is. I mean, there's chemistry teachers and physicists out there yelling right now to hear me say that, but it is true. Like we really don't know that much about subatomic particles, if they are even particles. So the idea was, okay, well, let's scale this up. Like, let's use atoms. Let's use molecules. And so they've gone all the way up to 2,000 atom molecules, and they've even done amino acids, so organic compounds. It gets tricky because you have to, and this is a part I won't pretend to understand. They have to turn these molecules into a coherent laser that's shined at a double slit. And at some point, the particles get too big to be shot out of, in a laser that way. And so that's where the experiment collapses. And one interpretation is that the particles just get so big they become visible. And so you cannot not observe them. And so, yeah, there's lots of different ideas. But the point is, I mean, a 2,000 atom molecule isn't a wave, right? Like we don't think that in classical physics, right? Yet it behaves like a wave when unobserved. And so there is an interpretation, and this is what the book goes into, obviously. There is an interpretation that matter... Can I do the video game analogy? I feel like Kyle's going to skirt me hard.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about what Kyle's going to do.
Don't worry about me, bro.
All right. Just bear with me here. Okay, so if you kind of imagine you are a video game character for a moment, or maybe you're just
Link.
Playing a video game. Yeah, and so Link, exactly. That's who I was thinking of when I wrote it. So imagine Link is looking at a castle, like on the horizon. He sees it, it's there, it's real. Then he turns around and looks at the forest. Ask yourself, where's the castle? And if your link, the castle's behind you because you can just turn around and look at it. It's right there, right? But we know, as the people outside the video game, that when Link isn't looking at the castle, it's not a visual object. It's magnetic polarities on a spinning hard drive. It's information. And so the act of observation causes that data or information to be rendered into a format that Link can see. And so this is sort of where the double slit takes people of a certain school of thought, is that yes, matter is real when we're looking at it or touching it or hearing it or whatever. But as soon as there's not a conscious agent interacting with it, it's not real. It's in an information state. And that kind of sounds like a crazy, like Sunday afternoon college discussion you might have with a buddy, but also you got to reconcile the video game analogy, because, if you were in that simulation with Link, everything would seem real to you, right? But when you're not looking at it, you and I know that it only exists as information. And so that is one idea. That's one interpretation of the observer effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Remember I brought this up on the show a while back, but there was a TED Talk by an experimental physicist who talked about taking a macro object and putting it into superposition. Mm-hmm. And this was an object that was billions of atoms. It was a piece of metal, a little bitty tiny sliver of metal, but they basically encased it in, they put it in a full vacuum with no light, with no Faraday cage, everything. And then they were able to induce a state of superposition by hitting it with a laser. And this is an object that's way too big to have quantum properties of its own. And yet they were able to do this. And he gave a TED Talk on it. And his analogy was it was kind of funny. It was, TED Talky. But he was like, when you're in an elevator by yourself, you do all kinds of, you might look around, but as soon as somebody walks in, you're like.
So are you saying the matter's shy?
He was comparing, he was like, so what we did was we put this piece of metal into an elevator by itself, right? Where it could do whatever it wanted. And then they were able to induce a superposition, which was where, and the superposition itself is also questionable, because what they're measuring is it vibrating or not? And no matter how they measured it, they got both yes and no responses, it may be a measurement issue.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is really like the fundamental point of my book. I'm not arguing that the universe works a certain way or that it's a simulation or blah, blah, blah. I'm arguing that we have way too much confidence in the scientific community. We are always 100% confident. And then the next generation's 100% confident in opposite.
The manual for how the universe works, final edition.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that I've kicked around is based on the quantum field theory.
Yeah.
And the way I understand it in my layman brain is I think about it as all these fields. Like every different subatomic particle, or all these quantum particles, are all actually resonances or pockets of resonance in a particular type of field. And in normal circumstances, in almost all circumstances, they don't interact with each other, the different fields. But in special circumstances, 2 fields or 3 fields or more will interact with one another. And that produces a range of phenomena, one of which might be gravity, space, time, all of these different things that we notice, and matter.
Yeah.
So if you have like some device that can launch a single particle or whatever, you may not be interacting with the other fields in its pristine state, in its normal state. And then once you do something else, like you try to observe it or whatever, you then introduce a certain type of resonance in another field that then interacts with that thing, and that's what collapses, the quote-unquote collapse is. I see it in my brain as like almost like a nodal point where the two resonating fields have a common node, and they sort of latch on or interact with each other, and that appears to us to be a particle, or it appears to have mass, or it appears to be, whatever, gravity, all of these different phenomena. It has inertia. Go
ahead.
Well, a while back, there was a story where they just discovered that sound waves have mass.
Yeah.
Did you read that one?
No, I've not.
So it was like unexpected, and there's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Sound waves have mass, which means they have gravity.
Yeah, you so perfectly and accidentally describe consciousness right now. It's kind of like meta and funny when you're talking about like I can see it in my mind, like you are experiencing, based on the conclusion I come to in the book, like you're experiencing a quantum phenomenon. It's not classical. It's not computation. Like you are literally experiencing something. You can quote unquote see it. I mean, it's not like vision, but you can see it. And then you're reducing it into a classical information system, which is language. And there's just no way for it to hit me the same way it hit you. I'm now trying to reconstruct it in my mind as a quantum experience. You know what I mean? And it's just now that we do have these new ideas, like actually falsifiable ideas of what consciousness is, I just feel like I see, this is kind of a woo word, but I just see synchronicities everywhere. And what you don't know, because you don't have a university affiliation, is somewhere out there right now, there's a professor writing this down. And he's like, I'm so going to take credit for this idea. Because now is the time to come up with a new theory of consciousness. I think kind of like mainstream academia is sort of realizing like, yeah, we don't really have a good idea. So,
well,
that's cool.
There is this, now, I know next to nothing about this. I've only heard people talking about it, but the microtubules system in the brain that has quantum interactions, and they think that now they're trying to say, oh, okay, so the whole like billions of neurons being complicated, that's not really working as like having a consciousness be emergent from that. So let's take it another few steps down. We'll throw the word quantum in there. We'll make it very more mysterious. And now we can say, wow, there's quantum stuff happening. So this is where consciousness is emerging from. But again, it's like, I feel like this stuff, as it keeps dropping down, what I think of as like, levels of physics where you're getting down into the realm of quantum interactions, it's already so weird that everything is up in the air, right?
Yes.
The entire quantum realm, the way it works, is completely counter to every classical and mechanistic explanation, and everything we see, like the whole idea of an atom being like a little solar system. It's not. It's a bunch of vibrating fields. And then these have quantum interactions with each other. And if you have interactions with that going on in your brain, well, how did that, again, I don't want to take this into evolution, but it becomes, you get this same question of like, well, where did this come from? Like, this is a way more complicated device we're talking about now.
Even evolutionary biologists are starting to wrestle with this, and some of the more open-minded ones are kind of saying like, maybe random mutation as an engine for speciation is maybe a little flawed. Maybe there is some quantum field seeking strategy that drives evolution. And so you brought up the microtubule thing. I write about that a bit. I have slides on it. I share your kind of initial reaction, like, man, these guys will do anything they can to use like quantum vocabulary for what kind of seems like spiritual phenomena, right? Like,
yes, exactly.
like you're literally saying your brain is a receiver for a quantum field. It's like, just go all the way, man.
Yeah, just come on, just take the next step, bro, and be like, it's non-local. We don't understand what's going on.
But coming from within academia, I get the reluctance to like go all the way, and I appreciate that at least somebody's kind of trying to disrupt the kind of standard model of consciousness. But you're right, I'm reading this stuff and it's like, maybe quantum field energy interacts with these arrays of basically antenna in your neurons, and that's where qualia comes from. It's like, dude, you're saying spirit, you're saying soul, like, just say it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
I rarely meet people who are like, get what I'm trying to say, because it's like you have to be really open-minded to talk about this stuff, but you also have to be like hyper skeptical, because it's just such a weird combination of like kind of new age ideas and sort of like pseudoscientific ideas, but then also like really profound ideas that we can't explain. So yeah, it's a wild time to be alive.
Yeah, I think that the new age stuff is like this compilation of a whole bunch of old ideas.
Yeah.
And then they've sort of been mashed together, and then given this kind of weird revivalist sort of fundamentalist aspect to it. It's like you worship this concept.
Yeah.
And then you get all these terms they use quantum all the time, and vibration and frequency, and
yeah. They use the word vibration and frequency so much that scientists are almost a little nervous to use those words.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though they have scientific meanings, it's like I just don't want to use the word vibration.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like it's poisoned the vocabulary almost.
Yeah, culturally we're in a weird time. Not to go on too much of a tangent, but it is, science is kind of suffering right now, which, pains me a little bit, because I think science is important, but I also am very critical of it in the book and elsewhere. And people are kind of looking for new explanations, and they tend to sort of be falling on like new age kind of, or maybe agnostic ideas, which is fine. I don't know the answer, but it is culturally we are in kind of a shift, it feels like right now.
Yeah.
Hey, man, whack jobs have been suffering for long enough. It's y'all's turn.
That's right.
It's mainstream's turn to suffer.
I agree with you, though. It's like I hate the term open-mindedness also, because it's been so overutilized. Like but you're right. It's like you have to have an open mind to new ideas. But the way I see it is, like, we joke about being scriptards and stuff, or at least, the joke's on me, I guess. But the way I think about it in my brain is just I need to understand how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if what is being explained to me, I run it through the processor that kind of builds the machine in my head, and like I run it through and I'm just like, I don't see how that works. Like I just don't. So I can't just sign on until I understand it. So a lot of times it's just like a different way of explaining it. I've done this with physicists. I listen to all these different physicists, and there's one guy that says one thing one time after I've heard all these different people's explanations, and I'm like, oh, and then it clicks to like everybody else's what they were talking about. But until then, all I have is like, well, they said this, but I don't understand. I don't see how that works.
Yeah, so your skepticism is that you don't take people at their word. You want to fully understand it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fine, but man, you can't.
Are you seeking to know the answer, or are you seeking to convince other people that you know the answer? And and in academia, oftentimes you're just trying to convince people that you know the answer. But some people, I think you are actually like a truth seeker. You just like to know for yourself.
I'm trying to understand it, or at least understand what I'm being told happens. Like I want to know the mechanism, like what causes it. So when I hear, on the flip side, I hear these accounts or these stories about UFOs or whatever it is in the realm of like people having sightings or having spiritual experiences. I'm trying to understand, like, how can that take place in the world as far as I understand everything. And if obviously I can't possibly understand everything, I'm not trying to say that, but there's nevertheless a desire constantly to try to make sense of whatever it is I'm being told. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that just seems like natural.
I completely know what you're saying, and I don't know what it is, but I have like this almost anger and resentment towards people trying to like pass off an idea as being complete when it isn't. And so I like listening to those stories because they're data, right? But then when someone comes along and says, well, actually, this is exactly how this phenomenon works, and we know this for X, Y, Z. And it's like, stop. I know you don't. I know you don't know that. And,
Yep.
Yeah. This is
So you
often
did-
called the sin of certainty in academia. It's like everyone is 100% certain.
So you build this, like I have this construction per se. Like this is sort of like an analogy, but I got all these building blocks, and certain building blocks you can verify for yourself in certain ways. Like people say it acts like this, or it does, in physics or whatever, this is what happens. And then you can find that out for yourself. And it's like, oh yeah, you start to understand it. And so you can become pretty sure about those things. And then there's like this whole realm of like a bunch of stuff that I've been told this is how it works, but I'm not very sure about it. And then the more you learn, some of those blocks kind of like fit into place and they're a little bit more clear. You're a little bit more sure and you can build on that. But of course, you can't be sure totally about anything. So it's like a big house of cards.
It is.
And occasionally something comes along that topples a whole bunch of stuff that you've constructed. And you have to start from a lower level where you have a lot more higher percentage of
confidence,
certainty.
Yeah.
It's enough to make you insane.
After you.
It's enough to make you insane, and you do kind of have to walk a fine line, because taking to its extreme, pretty soon it's like, well, I think space is fake. And it's like, well, because I've never been there, I can't see it, and so there definitely is like this middle. It's a weird, and I get why some of these famous scientists go crazy when they get older. It's like the quest for truth is a rough one.
Space is fake, dude. Yeah.
Do you guys want to see what neuroscience has to say?
Yes, let's see some slides.
Bring us the slides.
I've never shared something on Riverside, so hopefully I don't mess this up.
We're 48 minutes in. Let's just pause it, and you can reload or whatever.
We'll take a quick break.
Let's do it. Thank you, guys.
And we're back. Quick break there. And looks like we got the slides working.
Yeah.
Consciousness 101, Snake Bros University.
Hey. That's right. We could charge a little tuition for this. This is I was kind of thinking, what should I share with you guys? And I thought I've never really heard you guys talk about how the brain works. I've heard you guys talk about consciousness, but basically I think neuroscience kind of likes to not talk about how the brain works, because then you realize that, yes, it's incredibly complicated. It's amazing, but it really is just stimulus integration at the neuronal level. And it's hard to extrapolate from that to, the experience of being alive and occupying a body. It's just a mechanistic chain that doesn't really make sense. So I thought I would share kind of the standard model of consciousness, and
all right,
we can try to tear it apart.
These are the neurons dragging the signals
blocks of consciousness up onto the pyramid of life. Okay.
Yes. This is not really butt flaps. This is like butt skirts or something. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, so really, the theory in a set, like at first glance, is pretty simple, and it's that consciousness is an emergent property of network complexity. And there's this Matt Ridley quote. He says, complexity is just simplicity piled upon simplicity. And so
somebody needs to spray some glyphosate on that grass.
Seriously, it's out of control. Those are neurons. So that's
don't spray those with glyphosate, bro.
You don't want to spray that with glyphosate. Have a lawsuit on your hands. This is like a tiny little cubic. I'm sure less than like a cubic millimeter of brain tissue, and this is what it looks like. So you see
amazing.
this, you see that, and you're like, okay, maybe consciousness is a product of network complexity, because obviously complex, right? So,
I'd fire that network.
Yeah,
engineer.
I know. That's what I was going to
say. His
like,
cable management. Cable management is a real problem. So anyway, if this starts to feel a little too much like a university class, stop me. We'll
No.
We love this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. I thought
for this. We're just going to put some jokes in there.
I'm gonna need to send a letter to the dean about your interruptions. No joking. All right. So basically, I think everybody's seen a picture of a neuron before. This is kind of like the stereotypical neuron. They have all different sizes and shapes. One of them is shaped like a pyramid, which you guys might appreciate.
That's cool.
But the important ones in your cortex actually are shaped like pyramids. But basically, you have 3 zones. You have kind of an input zone, which is in yellow here. And the inputs are branches from other neurons. And so those other neurons release a chemical. The chemical causes something to change in the membrane. That's what's shown in this picture here. And it causes ions to flow in or flow out. So basically, this part of the neuron is composed of dendrites, these little branches. Dendrite tree branch is the idea. And chemicals interact with the dendrite in a way that it causes electrical current to flow. And so these currents are called potentials. And all of the potentials in the dendrites are analog. So they're graded. They can be little, they can be big, they can be negative, they can be positive. And all of those analog signals coalesce right here at this little funnel.
They're analog in amplitude.
Yes.
Yeah. And
So they can, yep. And they decay with distance. I don't know if that's true for analog in audio, but
yeah, it's like DC current decays with distance. There's resistance involved.
Exactly. And that's exactly the way the dendrite works. So, you have the stimulus that happens at the synapse, and then that signal decays with distance. So there's already some really interesting things there. The more you practice a particular pathway, for example, the synapse might move closer to the axon hillock.
They become more efficient. It's like the cable gets larger, so you got less resistance in that pathway.
Exactly. So that's like one of the many millions of ways that neuroplasticity can occur. But yeah, so it's all analog. And then at the axon hillock, there's a critical threshold value. And so if the sum input of these thousands and thousands of synapses causes the voltage inside the axon hillock to hit, it depends on the neuron, but usually about negative 55 millivolts. If it hits negative 55 millivolts, a digital signal is produced. It's binary. It's on or off. And that signal gets transmitted down the axon.
And it's at like a threshold rate or a threshold voltage, so it's always the same voltage, essentially?
Yes, exactly. There are transmembrane proteins that open in response to a certain voltage. And so they're only present here in the axon hillock. They're not in the dendrite. So no matter what voltage this dendrite is, nothing happens, right? But if this region, the axon hillock, hits negative 55, a large signal is produced. It travels down the axon. The axon can be huge. It can be a meter long, potentially, depending on the neuron. Or it could be, nanometer. And it causes chemicals to be released from its own axon terminals. So everything I just described, that's pretty much the function of a neuron. It's called stimulus integration. We have input, we have integration at the axon hillock, and then we have digital signal production. So right off the bat, it feels like a machine, right? We have analog signal, integration, transmission. So it's pretty cool.
And that input, like the dendritic zone, is like, man, you could have, it's analog, like you said, so it's like infinite variables.
Yes. And this is where the model for
That's
AI
wild.
came from, was to have nodes, which are parameters that, based on the input variables, a decision is made. And so it's computational. The neuron is definitely computational. I would never argue that the brain isn't computational. Basically, my argument is just that consciousness is not computational.
But it's computational in almost the same way that the moon is computing exactly which direction to go based on all the gravity that's affecting it from every body out in space. It's like,
in the
is
sense
that really
it's passive.
computation?
Right. Yeah. It's a good point. Because it's passive, right? It's
just
responding. It's
built like a circuit. It's got a design, and the design results in computation.
It's
right?
Exactly
that's
built
that's how they're built. Yeah.
It's built like
the
a
moon
circuit.
is the same thing.
Yep. And we tend to kind of like anthropomorphize things. We'll say like the neuron decides, or the signals, but that's not what's happening. It's completely passive, like you said.
Yeah, I guess you're right, because that's exactly what I was doing with the idea of computation, that it was like crunching all these numbers. Let's see, what should we do? It's not that.
That's super common in science. I remember learning that the nucleus was like the brain of the cell, right? It's just completely not true. But okay, so we learned. I want to just go a little bit more about integration. We don't need to spend too much time on this, but you can see that signals can come from an excitatory neuron. That's what this E means. But if they don't come together close enough in time, threshold isn't reached and nothing happens. So, if you picture a pain sensor in your finger, and if you just gently touch the tip of the nail, that stimulus is not strong enough to be transmitted to your brain. The binary signal is never produced, just the analog signal. But if you push a little bit harder and the stimulus comes rapidly in quick succession, you do get an action potential, and that signal would be sent to your brain. And so you would feel pain at that point. And it could come from multiple pain receptors, or it can come from one over quick succession, or there could be some inhibitory and excitatory impulses that sort of cancel each other out. And so
I can see the meme right now. Can I get this graph? I need to make a meme out of this graph, because like the first one is like me when I fell off the roof when I was 5, and then the second two are like me when I'm 30 and went to sleep,
Trying to get out of bed. Yeah.
just laid down in bed.
And the last one is me, being fine because now I'm on drugs, right, or whatever. You have the inhibitory signal.
Yep. There's your Vicodin right there. Yep, exactly.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I woke up with a mystery pain in my leg today. I'm like, I'm officially old. I have unknown sleep.
Yeah.
All right. So neurons do integration. That's the magic. I mean, it is interesting. Of course, it's beautiful and complex and fascinating, but that really is what neurons do. The other thing they do is they do stimulus encoding. And so again, if the inputs are sub-threshold, nothing happens. But there's degrees of how much they could be over threshold too. If they're just barely over threshold, the signals produced are all the same size, but they just occur at a higher frequency the bigger the stimulus is. And so this is how you can grade things with a binary signal, with a digital signal. If you, back to the pain thing, you push on a nail a little bit, it's painful, you send maybe 10 action potentials to the brain a second, and then if you push on it really hard, you send 100 or 200. So that's what neurons do. And then now you can imagine these integration machines arranged in networks. And the simplest networks there are reflexes. And so, there's thousands of different reflexes. The patellar tendon reflex is like the simplest example of any reflex there is. And then I want to talk about this one because it's interesting. It's called the vestibulo-ocular reflex. And it's just the idea like that you could look at a book and move your head left to right and still read it. And it doesn't really seem like a big deal, but actually it's a pretty complex reflex. We have these little circular canals in our inner ear filled with fluid, and then there are hairs growing into the fluid. And the hairs have little crystals growing on them that are kind of neutrally buoyant. So they don't float, they don't sink. And if you move your head to the left, the fluid has inertia and stays still, right? But the canal itself is actually rotating. So what happens is it bends the hairs. And so when it bends the hairs, that creates a digital signal from the sensors attached to those hairs. And if you look right, it activates the muscles on the left side of your eye to move left. And if you look left, if you move your head to the left, it activates the ones on the right. And it also works in this plane. It works like this. And this is just one of a million different reflexes. So to believe the mainstream idea of consciousness, we are to believe that at sufficient complexity, this type of networking results in, a ghost in a machine. And so that kind of idea really didn't come about until fMRI. And so this is what I work with. You guys are probably familiar with it already, right? fMRI?
I'm not familiar with this.
I don't think so.
Okay, so basically, you can scan your brain and get a magnetic three-dimensional image. And so different parts of the brain have different magnetic properties, so they look different on the image. Well, blood contains iron, specifically, hemoglobin molecules. If you look here, there are 4 little red dots in this molecule. Those are iron atoms. And iron can rust, it can oxidize. And so a single hemoglobin molecule can hold between 0 and 4 atoms of oxygen. And there's 250 million of these in every cell. So there's tons of iron atoms in your blood. And if it's bound to oxygen, it has different magnetic properties than if it's not. And so I could take a video instead of an image of your brain with fMRI, and I could watch changes in blood oxygenation regionally. And so I can have you just tap your finger while you're in the MRI, and this little piece of your motor cortex will light up. And then if I ask you to tap to a particular rhythm, like tap your finger to the rhythm of, the Snake Bros bumper music, and now your cerebellum will light up too, because that's where you do motor rhythmicity in your cerebellum. And so scientists over the past 30 years have sort of mapped what every part of the brain does.
Wow. Every part?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is like, okay, yeah, so does the cerebellum just do motor rhythm? Is that what the cerebellum does? And it's like, well, it lights up a million other times too. So it's really hard to attribute like definitively what the function of each region of the brain is. It also varies by individual. But yeah, more or less, we have an idea.
Are there regions that rarely light up? Like,
I don't know. I don't do a ton of task-based fMRI, which is what this is. I do something called resting state fMRI, where you're looking at the connectivity between regions under different like disease conditions. And so with resting state fMRI, we've kind of come up with a network where we think, I'm going to kind of like put it in quotes, consciousness is produced. And that's this network right here. This is called the default mode network. And the reason we think this is where consciousness is produced, are you ready for this hardcore scientific know-how?
Yeah, let's hear it.
When you're just laying in the MRI scanner doing nothing, this is the part of the brain that's active.
Therefore,
that's where consciousness comes from. I mean, I don't want to be too like dismissive. It is more complicated than that, but that's basically it.
I'm going to make one suggestion for future research.
Yeah.
That big lit up area is probably you listening to the noise.
Yeah.
This is like the obvious critique of this idea.
Because that's like the most overwhelming, like in an MRI machine.
Yeah, the part in the front is claustrophobia.
Yep.
Yeah, there is a part that you're like, am I ever going to get out of this?
That big bright area is it's the PCG. It's like a sensory hub. So actually you would expect it to be lit up in like a loud, noisy environment, which is funny. But there's other approaches too. It's like what's different in the brain between waking and sleeping. But this stuff is just, we're not going to figure out consciousness this way. That's my opinion. Like this isn't, it's going to take a more original systematic investigation than just let's see what part of the brain's lit up when you're just laying there, So.
Man, can I like volunteer? I mean,
yeah, I was thinking the same. I would love to have some of these tests done.
Yeah, like we could come up with a list of things to think about while we're in there. Like think about something that scares you.
Yeah.
Think about like the most relaxing situation possible.
But you can see how this is obviously flawed, right?
Try
like
to
what
figure
if
out how the universe works.
What if I was like, okay, Kyle, you think of the standard model of how the pyramids were built, and then Russ, you think of the craziest possible explanation you can think of for the pyramids, and then we'd be like, look, that's the conspiracy part of the brain.
Yeah, that's the conspiracy guy.
Yeah. Have you had someone go in there and like try to like write poetry or come up with poetry in their mind or something like that? I mean, have they done kind of like creative action?
Yeah, people have. I mean, people have done everything with fMRI. I haven't. You know, we follow the very like specifically outlined aims of our research grants and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah, of course.
people have done just about everything you can think of, and you know,
That's cool.
there's competing ideas, and yeah, it is cool. I think it's cool. I agree.
I think it's really cool.
But an analogy I've heard is trying to understand consciousness by studying the brain is sort of like trying to understand a radio station by looking at a radio.
Exactly.
Right? You're like, wow, look at this sound is coming out of this object, and you take it all apart. Where is the sound coming from?
Well, that's something I say in the book. You know, if we could give Isaac Newton a radio, you know, would he think it's receiving music, or would we think the speaker is where the music's produced? You know,
right? He would think, you know, if the assumption is that it must be being produced in this device, then you're never going to find it.
Yeah,
you can come up with all kinds of theories on how it's being produced in there, but the
Eventually
source is non-local.
Eventually, he'd find the crystal, and he'd be like,
right.
"It's crystals, man."
The crystal is vibrating. They store the music in the crystal.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you're hitting on like this is the fundamental argument about consciousness. And it's called transmission versus production theory. And we'll get to that again.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Marty.
But, anyway, so this is the name for the theory, integrated information theory. And I can't help but notice like how on the nose it is as a direct rebuttal to the theories of consciousness that came out like in the early 1900s associated with quantum mechanics and then Wheeler, because Wheeler has, you know, information theory, right? But we're calling it integrated information theory. And look at the ontological commitments and tell me if you can tell who they're arguing against here. The commitments are realism, so the world exists independent of experience. Physicalism, there's cause and effect, and atomism, that we can reduce these systems to minimal functional units like atoms or molecules. Who are they arguing against here? They're obviously arguing against the quantum theorists.
Yeah,
They're anti-realists.
it happened because we measured it.
They are like, this is clearly like they're on the other side of this, which is funny because I didn't realize anyone was really taking these quantum consciousness ideas that seriously when this theory came out. But they're very clearly arguing against that. They're saying that, no, this is a product of network complexity. It's emergent. And so emergent's one of those words that people throw around to sort of like sound smart and intimidate because no one wants to ask what a word means in a university hall, you know? And when it's effective, I mean, okay, consciousness is emergent. You convinced me. So there are other examples of emergent properties, snowflakes, you know, schools of fish, ant colonies. The idea is that some rule at the minimal level, like between two fish, that one fish will stay a certain distance away from another fish, results in things you wouldn't expect, like complicated geometric, you know, these cool oscillating schools of fish. Same with the snowflake. Some chemical rule or physical rule at the level of the water molecule results in these amazing fractal patterns. And so no molecule knows the pattern that it's going to form, yet the patterns form. That's emergence. And so the idea is, you know, no individual neuron knows what consciousness is, but if we put enough of them together in complex configurations, it emerges. And so here
I actually think this is a really good explanation. But it doesn't answer any questions because I think that emergent properties are real, but it doesn't actually explain it. It's like saying
exactly
it's similar to the thing like, well, you don't believe in gravity, jump out of a window. You know, it's like
it's exactly
like no, I want to know how it works. Like why does it do that?
Yeah, we're not questioning the existence of the phenomenon we call gravity.
Yeah.
I want to know the mechanism.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to like the the rules of the universe, the physical laws. Like we know that they're there, and we know that they have an effect, and because of all these laws that that have been reduced down to their most basic properties, causes, like, essentially from those the entire universe is emergent, essentially, but we still don't understand what's deeper than those laws. Like, we can't reduce them any further. And we still don't understand why they exist, but they might be emergent from something else, which could be emergent from something else. You see what I'm saying? Like, it just, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Like,
man, I can't tell you how nice it is to talk to people who agree with me. And now, because normally when I have this conversation, they're like, well, yeah, but clearly you can imagine a network complex enough where subjective experience emerges. I'm like, no, I can't. And that's why I put this here. To me, it's a category error, because like with the snowflake, we're talking about some sort of geometric relationship between water molecules resulting in a scaled up geometric pattern. But with network complexity and subjective experience, these are different categories of phenomena.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you can't have emergent properties that are completely distinct and unrelated to the fundamental rules of the system, I think. That
makes sense.
And to
all of those examples you gave, the ant hill, the snowflake, and the school of fish, and like flocks of birds, when they're making those amazing patterns, like all of that is geometric in nature, right? And it has to do with certain little tiny rules about distances and things like that, right? Shapes.
The rules are geometric, and the emergent property is geometric. There's like a harmony in this. It's just scaled up.
So the existence of the category error exists purely because we have this problem.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? No one would. No, I think well, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I would say no one would make this leap from network complexity to subjective experience if we didn't have subjective experience and a need to explain its existence, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because otherwise, why make this category error when most emergent properties are sort of, you can see how they're related to the fundamental rules.
Well, and other emergent properties. Other emergent properties are mechanistic, to your point. You said you want to know the mechanism. Like the mechanism, you can actually map it out, right? But in this case, you can't. There's no proposed mechanism for getting subjective experience from network complexity.
Right. It's like it's as though there's some unknown, unspecified threshold.
Yeah.
And that doesn't exist in a school of fish. Like, if it's down to just 3 fish, they're going to keep doing that thing. You know what I mean?
That's true.
So it's like they're suggesting that there's a scale to consciousness. Like, you can be sort of like that consciousness is analog in a sense.
And that is kind of how they describe it. They describe it like it existing on a spectrum, which could be the case.
I mean, yeah, that's true, because
but there's still a threshold.
For a long time, they were like, well, bigger brain, smarter. Yep. And eventually they were like, well, that actually doesn't work out.
Really correlate. Yeah.
And I would say probably the biggest problem, and this is true of, other theories of consciousness too, but it's non-falsifiable. Like if you have a consensus mainstream theory in science, someone should be able to come up to you, like say you're a proponent of the theory, someone should be able to come up to you politely and say, hey, what experiment could you design, and what outcome would lead you to believe that your theory is false?
Right.
And there is no such experiment or outcome for this theory that would lead them to believe it's false.
Yeah, so it's a bad theory.
It's a bad theory. And where you can potentially falsify aspects of the theory, it is falsified. And we'll talk about that too. So that it's like the worst of both possible worlds. It's
I just realized the graph is talking about shark attacks.
And ice cream sales. Yeah, the correlation is clear.
Yes.
That's right.
My goodness.
This is every statistics professor's favorite graph to show in class. I'm a statistics guy. I mean, neuroimage data processing it's statistics. It's spatial statistics. You're mapping like voxel intensities in regression models. So I say that I do neuroscience research, but really, I do statistics. So yeah, I mean, this is a correlative finding, and univariate associations in research are generally considered garbage, because all sorts of things are correlated that are.
Wait, what was that word? Univariate? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so just one variable associated with another, right?
Okay.
So you're not adjusting for other things. There's no like mediating variables or moderating variables. You're just saying, like in this case, ice cream sales and shark attacks are nearly perfectly correlated. So clearly eating ice cream causes shark attacks, right?
Yeah.
You left out which hemisphere they're in.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. This is northern.
Or maybe shark attacks cause people to want ice cream.
Could be.
You know what's funny is you just introduced a moderating variable. That's an example of a moderating variable, where two variables can be related differently based on some other variable. But anyway, so the point is there's clearly some other variable that explains this relationship, like the amount of time you spend in the water, for example.
Yeah.
So,
People buy ice cream when they're at the beach. Yeah.
exactly.
Or it's summer.
It's summertime.
So just because your hippocampus lights up when you're asked to remember something, you can't, it's one thing to jump to the conclusion that the hippocampus is where memories are stored. What's even a crazier assumption is to say that it's specifically network complexity in the hippocampus that leads to conscious awareness of those memories. It's like it's many logical leaps layered on top of each other. So yeah, it's a problem. There are also direct contradictions to other mainstream theories, like quantum mechanics, for example, which, take it or leave it, the ontological assumptions of this theory all are in direct opposition to our understanding of the physical world at this point. So that's a problem. There's also this fact that a large percentage of dementia patients with severe brain atrophy experience complete remission of symptoms before they pass.
Yeah.
And
Terminal
so-
lucidity. That's weird.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this idea that well, how does that work if consciousness is a neuronal complexity issue? There's also just variability within the day. And this is kind of a weak argument, but it's still an argument that should be addressed. Obviously, conscious experience is very different when you're awake versus when you're asleep, yet network complexity is exactly the same. So you at least have to add some other things. You can't just say it's an emergent property of complexity. And to build on that, the brain is just as metabolically active at night as it is during the day. So these are just things that no one is willing to address. There's also observer permanence, which is this idea that, when you were 8, your brain was radically different. Your emotional control was different. Your memories were different. Everything was different about your brain. However, your subjective experience of being inside your body and listening to your thoughts and looking out the world were probably pretty much the exact same then as they are now, despite radical changes to your network complexity in your brain. So consciousness seems pretty invariable until we get to lay life. And, I think it was Kyle's point earlier, this sort of is panpsychism, because what we're not saying neuronal network complexity necessarily. We're saying any type of network complexity should lead to emergent consciousness.
Yeah, that would be just think about piezoelectricity in granite.
Yeah.
And there's just so much granite down there. And there's bound to be all kinds of electrical signals moving around in the granite. It's also got it's radioactive. There's all that kind of stuff. It's be really cool if it was a giant brain thinking and existing and wondering why occasionally we try to trepan it.
Are you, you said piezoelectricity. Are you familiar with how your bones get their shape?
No, sir.
Okay, so there is a network of cells that look a lot like neurons called osteocytes in your bones. And they detect the electrical currents because your bone's a crystal, right? It's calcium phosphate crystals. And when you apply pressure to those crystals, an electrical current is generated. And the osteocytes have electrical sensors. And wherever they feel a strong electrical current, they tell another cell called the osteoblast to put bone right here. And wherever they don't feel an electrical current, they get rid of the bone. That's why your larger bones are hollow, because there's no compression. The compression and tension cancel themselves out, and hollowed out. So it's piezo and reverse piezoelectricity. So
Wow.
kind of cool, right?
That's freaking awesome.
You literally have electrical sensors in your body.
That's the wrong button. There it is.
That was cool.
That is freaking
That made
cool.
the whole. It's dude. I mean, everything else you're saying is cool, but that was worth the entire interview right there. That was amazing.
You know what I just invented?
What'd you invent?
Bone stressing machine.
Yeah.
Like you just get in it and it just like it's constantly putting stress on, you just build bigger bones, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, the argument would be is that's what physical therapy is, right? They get you up, they make you walk around to stress the bone after a fracture or whatever. But
Yeah, but you have to do stuff. I'm talking about a
no
machine
one
that like,
wants to
does
do
it
that.
for you, bro.
Nobody
want to do anything.
Okay, so one thing
But that would be useful for astronauts.
yeah, for sure.
People in 0G need can we just induce the electrical signals in the? I know we're going way off on a tangent now, but can you induce electrical signals in the bones to keep their bones from getting
From atrophy,
bird-like?
yeah.
Well, you guys have probably seen bone stimulators, right? They're electrical
No.
thing. After like a fracture repair, you have a bone stimulator. They put an electrical current through the fracture
Oh, okay.
for that
Cool.
exact
I
reason.
guess no.
So you're on the right track.
Somebody
You're
could
on the
use
right
that
track.
on me. Yeah.
Wait, all right. We need a giant Tesla coil. We need to raise the frequency, and then you just stand on the platform. We'll be freaking superhuman.
Yeah. There you go.
So I wonder if I mean, I'm going to go further on this tangent of bones, but
Please.
if the electromagnetic field of the Earth was stronger, much stronger, perhaps everyone would be huge.
Yeah. Maybe you would be giant. Yeah.
That's a
Okay.
good point. Your bone density might be higher. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's possibly. We can't, unfortunately, we
It would be
can't do
an
the Tesla
emergent
coil experiment.
Yeah. Okay, so I did want to go back just for a minute before you move on to the next slide there. Well, I mean, yeah, you've explained that one, but going back to the studying the when you say like these sectors in the brain light up in this in the MRI machine, is there a way to tell if it's signal input or output?
No, and there's actually a huge debate about what we're even studying. So
Okay.
all we know is that area of the brain is asking for more oxygen. That's really all.
Yeah.
Because
So it's something's
oxygen-
happening. There's chemical reactions going on,
Yeah.
and you know that it's active. So the thing that was really that brought the question about was the idea that some situation would happen, and like if we're going to think about the alternative theory that maybe the brain is more of an antenna, is there some kind of input happening in a certain sector, and it's causing the you see what I'm saying? Or like one sector is doing all this output and the other ones are receiving information.
well,
That would be interesting to know.
here's the thing. Because, yeah, I mean, this is obviously the problem with transmission theory is what's the signal, you know? And
Of course.
maybe it's electromagnetic, but that doesn't make any sense because we would detect it, right? And so there is this idea that there are other ways of conveying information rapidly between two locations in the universe.
Yeah.
And
course, yeah.
and you know what they are. I know you might. I don't know if you like it or not, but
Do you not like entanglement either?
No, I'm cool with that.
Are you
Because I think,
developing-
yeah, I think you know, space and time are they seem to be variable, or they might also be fields. Like it's
Yeah.
just that's what I'm saying.
It's field
Wouldn't it-
interactions.
Wouldn't it be amazing if we started looking in the brain and we found out that there were structures that displayed sort of the strange resonance and entanglement and photon harnessing ability? And you know, it turns out there are, and so that's
Yeah.
a chapter of the book. I mean, microtubules do behave very strangely, and they exhibit properties that would lead you to believe they're at least related to consciousness. So anyway,
Interesting.
but I'll admit that's a theory I don't understand super well. This is actually a theory that was sort of gifted to me by a Discord member, Carl, who is fascinated with it. But I'll save it. We'll get there. We're almost there.
Cool.
Okay, I got to mention AI. People hate because I have a podcast with my friend Alfredo, and people hate my take on AI because everyone is obsessed with AI right now, and it is so cool. I use it; it's cool. Like, don't get me wrong, but you got to recognize that there's a motive from these companies to make it feel like magic, to make it seem like it's conscious, to make it seem like it exhibits human characteristics, because that is just so freaking cool and interesting, and it's all people want to talk about. So there is like it's beneficial if they can convince people that it does exhibit these qualities. And so I just wanted to put like a basic explanation of how like machine learning works. And, going back to that Matt Ridley quote, just show you that it is just simple systems stacked on top of each other. It's not magic. It's complexity masquerading as magic. And so basically you have an input layer. These are variables. They're predictors. It can be, say you're trying to predict whether or not someone has cancer from an AI. You could input images. Let's say it's a brain cancer detector. You can input images, and it's going to look at certain voxels. It's going to look at the brightness of those voxels. It's going to look at the edge differences, like if you have a really bright spot next to a really black spot. This can all be mapped statistically. Nothing magic about that. It's going to look at medical history. It's going to look at blood biomarker levels. And then it's going to put them into something called a hidden layer. And this is where everyone gets excited. It's this magical place where magic happens, and there's probably consciousness, and we're probably going into many universes to compute these amazing things. And then the output is either yes or no, like they have cancer. And so
it's a magic 8-ball, right? That the
it's
thing
a magic
disappears, it floats up through the middle, it appears in the window at the top. Wow, it's right. And it says somewhat likely.
Yep. Probably
maybe later.
Better luck next time.
Yeah.
And so, listen, you can't argue with the output. The output's cool, but at the end of the day, it is just statistics. I don't want to bore people, but basically there's different ways variables can be related. They can be related linearly, right? And I look at this graph and I say, okay, if the x-axis is 4, then the y-axis is about 0. They can be related nonlinearly or polynomially or quadratically. And so you can just, find the relationship between two variables. You can plot the relationship. The relationship between two variables can be dependent on another variable. That's called an interaction. This is like what you said earlier, the hemisphere thing. Like the relationship between ice cream and shark attacks is dependent upon where you're located on the earth, right? So, and you can have multivariate interactions where you need to know the value of x and y to predict z. And then those multivariable interactions can be nonlinear. And so all AI does is it puts every variable into a hidden layer where it assesses the interactions between those variables. And we generally don't do that in statistics because it doesn't teach us anything. We're normally doing statistics like for a reason, to find out which variables are important. This is just all about making the correct prediction, which that's not really a statistics thing. That's more of like a modeling mathematics thing. And so it looks at all these interactions, and it's also computationally expensive. To do like 100 10-way interactions would take my computer several hours, right? So that's all AI is. It's statistical regression. I know that makes people upset because they're like, well, look at Google VO3. That's not statistical regression, but actually it is. You just train it on a big enough data set of video, and it can start to predict what pixel should be what color at what time. And it's computationally expensive. That's why it costs $250 a month. But at the end of the day, it is not magic. And so I just want to make that point because the neuroscience community is almost kind of capitalizing on the excitement about AI becoming conscious to sort of put forward this idea that it really just is network complexity. So I don't know if you guys agree with that or not, but that is.
They're also like, I mean, with all this excitement, they're probably getting more funding for research.
Oh. This is what research is, man. You gotta make it exciting. Like, who wants to invest $1 million into a cool statistical algorithm? You want a conscious agent that can cure cancer, And so, yeah, this is attracting more money than any other area of research ever for like the past 10 years. Yeah.
I think AI is an amazing tool, and I love
Yes.
it. I think it's really cool, and I think, I'm pretty optimistic about the future of it.
Me
I
too.
do not think it's going to become conscious,
For all the reasons that I don't
but that's
think.
probably why I'm optimistic.
Yeah. 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 It might be good to not be conscious.
There's a part of me that's got this base like fear when I'm trying to be nice to Grok, and then I'm also like when I see these like Optima robot looking things,
Yeah.
I'm just like, dude,
Well, listen,
that
that
thing hanging out in
robot.
my house, and then, but my fear about that is more that like somebody's gonna hack it, and
Exactly. I was going to say that robot doesn't have to become conscious to kill you, right? It could
yeah,
just.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm just like, that's freaky, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I'm with you on that. I think that's a great explanation.
But
Yeah,
I don't think AI is conscious for the same reason I don't think network complexity explains human consciousness. It's
Right.
an emergent property that doesn't make sense. So anyway, so I don't know how much more time we have. Are we doing okay?
Yeah, plenty of time. Keep going.
Okay. So there are other brave people out there coming up with other ideas. The first idea of consciousness was transmission theory. And this was like the world's first psychologist, basically. It wasn't called that back then, but William James, 1899, he put forward this idea that consciousness came from somewhere else. It was transmitted to the brain. The brain was like an antenna. And this was the other side of this debate was production theory, which is that the brain produces consciousness. And they've clearly won. 125 years later, we're basically having the exact same argument, but the production theory folks are certainly mainstream. And so many people know this Tesla quote, which is why I put his picture up here, that my brain is only a receiver for consciousness, that somewhere in the center of the universe, I haven't pierced, blah, 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 blah. I don't have the quote memorized, but he was a believer in this idea, as were many people. It was semi-mainstream back then. It has kind of gone away. There is this guy, he's an incredibly controversial guy, so I hesitate to bring him up, but he wrote a great paper, so I got to give him credit. He went on Rogan. Are you guys familiar with this guy, Robert Epstein?
No, but
Yeah, I need to go find it. If he was
Unfortunate.
a transducer.
That's right. Unfortunate name, but he is unrelated to the other guy. So he became famous for basically going after Google. He designed this system that could detect if Google was trying to manipulate an election in a certain county or whatever. So it has nothing to do with psychology. But before he kind of went off on that sort of risky endeavor, he was a psychologist. He was a pretty mainstream psychologist. He was like an editor at a pretty big journal. And he put forward this idea that the brain is a transducer, which is not a new idea. He's just kind of bringing it back. And he's making the case. This is when I started getting less creative with my slides. I'm sorry, you guys.
It's all right.
I didn't have a lot of time.
I like the generic slide.
Yes, but if I could just read, he kind of makes this point. He says, when internal perception really goes awry, people can be overwhelmed by hallucinations, visions, sometimes of a religious nature, or distortions of reality so extreme they have to be hospitalized. Even the normal among us hallucinate several times each night. We call it dreaming. And we all have at least two highly disorienting experiences each day called hypnagogic states, those eerie and sometimes creative interludes between sleeping and waking. I have sometimes dreamt intricate full-length movies that seemed as good as any Hollywood film. Alas, most of the time, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to hold on to even a shred of a dream during the few seconds when I'm staggering from my bed to the bathroom. Where does all of this content come from, and why do we have so little control over it?
That's a great quote. I like that.
It's the guy can write. I appreciate a good writer in science. There are not many of them out there, but this is dreaming, hypnagogic states, all of these things. We don't understand them at all, and it is infuriating to me how there is just sort of this insistence that we do actually understand them, and we don't. We don't. It's really bizarre. It's just like this quest to just say you've solved the mystery, even if you haven't, is very strange to me. But So he kind of puts forward some evidence, basically, that medical journals have been reporting this paradoxical lucidity or terminal lucidity in very mainstream, rigorous scientific fashion. There's a Nature paper where 124 caregivers reported 80% of cases patients had 30 to 60 minute, complete remission of their impairment before death. And, it is difficult to explain that, if the brain is an information processor and consciousness is an emergent property of complexity, then how is it that you can have normal brain function in a severely damaged brain? And so, anyway, it's a question. It's open for interpretation.
And how does it just show up right before they die? Where's the timer? That's the other part of it. It's implying that there's
retrocausality.
Yeah, what is the mechanism that okay, about an hour, you got about an hour before the whole body's going to stop functioning. Yep. So let's have our network complexity emergent consciousness come back for 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever.
It doesn't make sense. I don't hang my hat on any one of these arguments. They're just all arrows in the mainstream theory.
Yeah.
But these are questions that just people refuse to contend with, and it's just why? Why are you so married to a hypothesis? And now, of course, I know, working in academia, why you get married to a hypothesis, because you're competing against someone who disagrees with you for a certain pot of money that has to go to one of you. And so you want your hypothesis to be more mainstream. You want there to be more support for your hypothesis. So when you have 12 people read your grant proposal, 7 of them agree with you instead of 4, right? And so there is this very political, there's a weird incentive structure to act like this idea that you're just ruthlessly open-minded and self-critical doesn't really reward you.
Doesn't pay.
Yeah. And that's kind of the explanation.
So one question I have is, I remember reading these stories about people that had not very much brain. There was a lot of fluid, and they just had small, but they were perfectly healthy, perfectly normal people. And then when they got brain scans, they were just oh my God, there's just mostly fluid in there.
Yep.
So that's a real thing?
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean,
okay.
I don't know specifically if every instance that's been reported is real, but there are real examples like that. There's even some in this paper. There's people who have again, this is super rare and uncommon, but there's 95% brain loss and they're, IQ of 80 or whatever. They're semi-functional, so it's, how do you explain that? It's a little bit different than saying consciousness though, because in that case, it's how are they even cognitively normal? I'm not really sure how to even explain that, but yeah, to the main point here, I mean, they appear to be conscious, but how? They don't have that critical threshold of network complexity that we're told is necessary.
Yeah, along with the network complexity to do almost everything else that the brain is supposed to do.
Yeah, in the body, just with the body's parts and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of that though, because I don't go as far to I'm never going to argue that the brain isn't responsible for emotional processing and language production and stuff. So it's man, that really makes me think about stuff I just assumed to be true, even in my already sort of fringe mindset when it comes to neuroscience. But yeah, I don't know what to make of that. That's a weird one.
Yeah.
And then
we don't have to go off on that. That was just making me think of the terminal lucidity. There's this other thing where people are lucid and they shouldn't be because most of their brain isn't working. That's all. It's just.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. And there's kind of related things I'm not going to read this because it's just tons of words, but there are near-death experiences. Where,
you got really lazy with this slide, bro.
Well, hey, I found out about this 2 days ago, man. Come on. But so you could see there's like an incremental decline in the
Yeah, the text was like quite a bit bigger, almost 3 times as big as that. And then the next slide is just
I make a comeback in the next few slides. I
All right, good.
think it's better. But basically, he's arguing that the brain is a transducer. And, when you look at what the body is, like if evolution is true, which, I believe some version of evolution is true, animals, plants, humans, all organisms are amazing at evolving transducers. Like if there's something that we do well, it's the evolution of transducers. And so, the retina is a transducer, the cochlea are a transducer, the millions and millions of sensors in your skin are transducers. It really, like if you ask like what is a human being, it really does seem to be just a suite of transducers connected to a brain.
what I love about that explanation is that when you think about what the transducers are doing, especially when you consider evolution as being sort of a biological emergent, like emergence of biological material, that these transducers are so finely tuned to the very specific things going on in the universe that like you can't even detect if you don't have the transducer already.
Pretty amazing.
Like light, like, I mean, I don't know. It's just, it's interesting. You can sense vibration, but then it's like, oh, well, we're going to tune into it like super fine. And then like certain aspects of light, obviously you might feel heat.
Yep.
But it's just crazy that like it just keeps going and like dials into that signal, and like it's like constantly tuning itself to the signal that exists. And then
it's amazing.
It's also rejecting parts of the signal that would cause
confusion or
too much noise or
yeah.
confusion. It's like it's dialed in perfectly. Like I've always thought it was really interesting how the eyes only see 1 octave of frequency, and the ears are like, I can't remember how many octaves, 13 or 14 octaves in sound.
It's unbelievable, man. And
Which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it does kind of, and man, not to take like a huge tangent, but it does kind of make you think like, well, what is conscious subjective experience then? Because like we are, and this is a common thing people say, but we are tuned into like this very narrow band of stimulus. In terms of what you're saying, like the visual spectrum and the auditory spectrum. And it's like, and this goes back to the whole question, like and I hate to say it, people hate this, they hate it, but it's, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it make a sound? And you do have to ask yourself like, well, what is sound actually? And so in the absence of a human being or in the absence of a microphone, sound is a compression wave moving through the air. In compression, there's nothing intrinsic.
Displacement.
Yeah, there's nothing intrinsic to a compression wave that means it would be sound in the absence of an observer, right? It's only sound when when there's cochlea around. So when a compression wave hits a tympanic membrane, and the tympanic membrane resonates at the same frequency of that compression wave, and that resonance is transferred along 3 tiny little bones, and then another membrane is vibrated, which creates a compression wave in water, which is inside this little snail-shaped organ in your ear. And there are hairs in that organ that detect that vibration, and that is an analog signal that gets converted to a digital signal, which goes to your temporal lobe, and you experience the perception of sound in your head.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I love that explanation. Like
in the absence of the brain, where's the sound?
Yeah, the sound doesn't actually exist. You have compression waves, you have displacement of particles, molecules of air.
The kind of, I would say, maybe alarming or challenging aspect of that is you can repeat that exercise with every single sense. You can do it with vision, you can do it with touch.
Right, but if you start to look at once you go beyond the thresholds that these, at least for me, like sound and light, you go beyond the thresholds on either side, like you start ending up with tons of noise.
Yeah.
And so, like, imagine we were seeing radio waves. Like, there
Right.
wouldn't be night. It'd be a freaking whiteout all the time.
You know, it's funny though. If we could see radio waves, we'd be arguing about whether or not you could see radio waves in the absence of an observer. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, that's true.
like, and they'd be like, no, because no one could imagine a world without visible radio waves. Like, of course they exist in the absence of an observer, but like here, you and I are not looking at radio waves, right? So we're like evidence that radio waves don't exist in the absence of an observer in a perceptual way. You know, you don't experience them, and people don't really. No one agrees on what consciousness is, but it's clearly that. It's clearly like the subjective experience of a thing. You know, of a sensory stimulus, of an internal thought, of reasoning. It's not the computational process itself. It's not the emotion itself. It's the witness. Like, who's bearing witness to that thing. Anyway.
And it's also, I think, in some cases, because, you know, one thing for sure, reading your book was making me like focus a lot more on my own internal, because, you know, you're bringing up questions about this, like, who is this, what is this experience that you have that you can't give to anyone else? You can't really, you can explain it in simple terms, but you know, the assumption is everyone has this in their head, right? But
Right.
that I'm having this subjective experience, I'm hearing this, I'm having this conversation with you, I'm having all the, you know, all this sensorial input of sitting here, and the air conditioner's going, and I'm looking at the slides and everything. But there's also like an internal dialogue going on, right?
Yep.
That's part of my consciousness. But then there's also a part of it that can like sit back and look at all that and be like, what the hell is all this stuff?
Well, hopefully there's an internal monologue. If you're having an internal dialogue, we got to get you committed.
Yeah. That shouldn't be a dialogue. Yeah. It can be a dialogue. Don't you ever argue with yourself?
I was gonna say I have like 7 people in there.
Yeah.
Bro, are you serious? Because, like, it's not supposed to be a dialogue?
No, it is. It's whatever you want it to be, man. It's people dismiss that. People people are like, okay, you know, Russ, you feel like you're in your head, right? Like if I ask you where you are, you're like, well, I'm right here. You don't feel like you're in Kyle's head, although you guys are, you know, maybe you have some telepathy between the two. but and then Kyle feels the same way about himself, and then it's like, that isn't that interesting? Like, why is that? You know, because that's a phenomenon worthy of study, and people just are like, well, no, I mean, it just makes why of course it's like that. And it's like, well, I don't know for certain that ChatGPT feels like he's in a server in San Mateo, you know?
Right.
And so why doesn't he? You know, now of course the waters are so muddy because people are like, well, he does.
Well, ChatGPT might feel like it's on Earth, right? Like
It might. I don't know.
I'm just saying
It's in a series of tubes.
yeah, that's right. I feel like I'm in my head, but
Right.
that's where all the transducers are. Right. Like the transducers are all feeding, like all the wires are going to this processor from all the transducers.
And the main perception, you know, is like, it's right here, right?
Well,
and
you got
here.
you got stereo.
Yeah.
Two
So
times,
it's
two
like,
different
yeah, you got
frequency
the stereo
sets.
here, and then you got your scent, and like, so all of it's, that's why I feel like, you know,
That's what I'm saying, is that the transducers are all feeding into a central area. So like for ChatGPT, maybe the server is like too minute. Like I don't feel like I'm thinking in this part of my brain right now. Like it's sort of like a general
yeah, sort of behind
central
these
area.
transducers. Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like AI, the transducers are everyone's input. Everyone on the planet. That's the input.
Yeah. I think the
But of
question
course,
though is like, why do you even have that feeling at all? Like there's no obvious reason why ChatGPT should feel anything, and I don't think it does.
Yeah.
It's like, okay,
Yeah.
like I'm this microphone is a transducer. So I talk to the transducer, it turns into a binary signal. I could plug it into ChatGPT and I could ask it what's 2 + 2, and the speaker could say 4. Now, if I asked you guys that, if I asked Russ that, it's going to be the exact same process, like transducer, digital signal transducer, but I believe, and it is a belief, I have to admit, I believe that the experience of me asking you that question is different from for you guys compared to ChatGPT. Like I don't believe ChatGPT is like experiencing my question. Like it's not listening to me talk and then
I hear you.
adding it together and then answering. But you are, if you're like me, right? And I assume you are, because I assume we're both conscious, that you're a spectator. Like you're watching you're experiencing it. And I don't think AI does. And then the question becomes, well, why not? Since we're just both complex networks.
But I mean, to get into the weeds on this, you have to consider, what are you experiencing? Like if I asked you a question, because really it's just a bunch of compression waves slapping you in the face.
I know, man.
Like you're not really actually looking at me. You're looking at the light that I reject.
Yep.
Not the light that I absorb, not the light that I'm in harmony with.
Or the light
right?
that you're emitting, which would be infrared.
The light that I'm emitting, you're blind to it. You're blind to the light that I'm absorbing. You're only seeing my rejection of light that is not, it isn't in harmony with my physicality.
Yep.
And then I'm slapping you with compression waves, and somehow, because of an agreed upon system developed over thousands of years, you can turn that into something that we can both pretty much agree on. That's insane.
Yet there's no mystery left in the world, is what neuroscientists would tell you. We've got consciousness figured out. It's nuts, man. I mean, you're producing a compression wave with air blowing over vocal cords. I'm turning a compression wave into a digital signal. It's intelligible to both of it. The whole thing is bananas. And yet it's like,
who came up with this system?
We got to figure it out. There's no mystery here. That's literally the way people act. Is there's no mystery here. So anyway, so I appreciate that you guys share my rejection of that idea. It's crazy.
Well, before you move on from that previous slide was telling a story. Can you summarize it?
Yeah. So there's a history of near-death experiences where people report to experience sensations that they've never experienced in their life. So, for example, there's like a class of near-death experiences that occur in congenitally blind people. So people who have never seen anything, and yet in their near-death experience, they report seeing, like in this case, a male physician and a woman standing above me. I knew it was me. I was pretty thin then. I was quite tall and thin at that point, and I recognized at first that it was a body, but I didn't know at first that it was mine. Then I perceived that I was up on the ceiling, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. What am I doing up here? I thought, well, this must be me. Am I dead? And so she described it as in the best that she could, since she's never had a visual experience. She described it as a visual experience. And there are many of these, and I don't obviously put definitive weight on personal anecdotal experiences, but come on, how is that not at least pretty interesting to you? It's just another one of these questions. The thing that's interesting about transduction of consciousness is it explains a lot of things. It explains a lot of things that we traditionally call parapsychological or supernatural or religious. If consciousness is not produced by the brain, if we're a receiver for consciousness, then all of a sudden some of these other ideas kind of go from being fringe to, maybe there is some sort of explanation for that. And so I think that's interesting.
All right. Wow. Yeah.
And so,
how dare you try to skip that slide, bro? That was an incredibly important slide.
Sorry. I was getting self-conscious.
That was amazing.
I saw the story. I was like, we got to go back to that one. Yeah.
But a mainstream person would say, well, that's all bunk because there's no signal, right? So in order for there to be a transducer, there needs to be a signal that you're converting. That's what a transducer is. So you need to show me a signal in the brain, and you need to show me a transducer. And so there really was no idea for that. Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner, really obviously genius guy. is now like firmly relegated to like almost like a conspiracy theorist for the audacity to propose this idea. He wrote a book, Emperor's New Mind, where he outlines this idea. Listen, I won't pretend to understand it. Carl, you and Carl in the Discord turned me on to this idea. I loved it. I loved it because it's mechanistic, and it's obviously fascinating. And it wasn't really falsifiable, though, until this other guy, Stuart Hameroff, came along. He's an anesthesiologist. And that's interesting because it's a good way to frame what consciousness is, right? There's clearly a difference between someone on the operating table before they get general anesthesia versus after, right? Yeah. So it's like a really objective, standardized way to frame consciousness. And so the obvious question, let me see what my next slide is. Okay. The obvious question is, well, what's the mechanism of general anesthesia? Because then we'll figure out what causes consciousness. If we find the parts of the network that anesthesia disrupts, we'll be able to show which networks are responsible for conscious experience. And so maybe the mainstream neuroscientific view really is falsifiable. So there's some excitement. But it turns out we don't actually really know how anesthesia works.
Yeah.
We know that anesthesia is highly nonpolar. It's all anesthetics. They have like no electrical gradient across them. And so they clearly are interacting with something maybe lipid-based or some other nonpolar molecule. But we don't know how they work. And so Hameroff's line of research, he was putting forward the idea that microtubules are the binding site for anesthesia. And so this was ridiculed and rejected immediately because everybody who's taken, Biology 101 knows that microtubules are simply cytoskeletal elements. They're like bones, they just give the cell structure. They provide a mechanism for motor proteins to walk, which is cool. And they're involved in mitosis, which is cool. They align the chromosomes and pull them apart. They provide the cell with structure. They provide cilia. They're the basis for little flagellum and cilia to propel cells around. But they're just boring cytoskeletal elements. Now, a couple interesting things about microtubules. They're like amongst the most evolutionary conserved thing there is in eukaryotic cells, basically, other than like mitochondria or whatever.
No way. Explain what you mean by that.
Okay, so there are certain things in cells that are present in all, let's say, you could say animals, that'd be highly evolutionary conserved. If they're present in animals and plants, it's like, wow, that's really highly conserved. It must be a really important thing, right? Because after all these generations and generations of evolution, natural selection never got rid of it. It's present in humans, it's present in rats, it's present in flies, it's present in plants, right? And so microtubules are present in everything, every eukaryotic cell, as far as I know. There might be some exceptions, but so it tells you that they're really important and they're ancient. And so, but still you can dismiss that because you can say, well, they serve an important function. That doesn't mean they're the site of consciousness, right? So, but it's just
did claws, right? Claws, fangs. I mean, they're great. They were great.
Well, yes, but geraniums don't have any of those things, right? So it's not.
Plants.
So it's or even like unicellular organisms, right? So they're everywhere.
What do you mean? Plants don't have claws? Are you kidding me?
Venus,
well, yeah, some of them do. Yeah.
Some of them do, I guess. But then you have this other thing, and this is like my area of research. If microtubules are related to consciousness, you'd expect to see microtubule pathology in disorders of consciousness. And it turns out that microtubule pathology is not like a issue in neurodegenerative disease. It's like the issue. Like the primary pathological protein that shows up in Alzheimer's disease is called tau. And so what does tau do? Well, healthy tau stabilizes microtubules. That's its only job. And so when you get hyperphosphorylated tau, microtubules disintegrate. And what's interesting is someone can have Alzheimer's for quite a long time without major cognitive decline, but once tau becomes pathological, cognition falls off a cliff, and consciousness, they have an altered level of consciousness after that point. And this is also true for Parkinson's and Huntington's and all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases. So isn't this feeling like a little bit more mechanistic than consciousness emerges from complexity? I think so. I think I like it. But this theory is considered fringe and controversial because of what Hameroff and Penrose propose is occurring within these microtubules. It is, however, mechanistic, and it is partially falsifiable. So right off the bat, this gets me, much more excited. Pyramids. Here you go. So within these large cortical neurons called pyramidal neurons, we have these incredibly complex microtubule networks. And the proposition is that these tubulin molecules are nonpolar, but they have like tryptophan residues, and they have electrons that get connected and they become polar. So the tubulin subunit itself, these little beads, are nonpolar, but they have polar things sticking off either side of them to the point where they're almost like a binary system. They can be
like
facing
geometric polarity in a way.
Yes.
Okay.
And so the idea is that these become entangled. And listen, when you read these papers, it sounds like you're reading Star Trek. I can't make sense of it. So I'm going to do a bad job explaining this. But the idea is the more experiential something is, like the more engaged in an experience you are, the more entangled these tubulin units become with each other and potentially maybe something else, something somewhere else. And this is all very speculative, but basically they show here that these dipoles are aligned in a conscious person and they are dispersed in an anesthetized person. And some of this actually has been shown experimentally. It's not all just theoretical.
So these things they rapidly change. Like the little beads, the little geometric beads.
Emphasis on rapidly. It's like borderline, approaching like the speed of light rapidly. It's very
They
rapid.
are wow. So every little bead of that microtubule is just like switching polarity, geometric polarity, and aligning with things and changing all the time. And so this
Great. It's a giant abacus.
It is.
yeah. So this
It is computational.
I forgot the term already
No,
for the little
it's
thing that
Quantum
attached.
computation. Yeah.
The thing that was in the previous slide that was sitting on it looked like you were saying that are like little, not this one, but the little things that are attached to it.
So
Dendrites.
oh yeah, dendrites. Yep.
No, is that what it was?
What?
I don't know. Sorry.
You said it helps cells walk or cells something. Back.
Motor proteins. Yep. Motor proteins. Yeah. Kinesin and dynein.
So how? Explain to me again now that I understand this microtubule a little better. What is that other thing doing on it? It's sitting on it.
There's like mainstream what we think microtubules do, and then there's this. So like the mainstream idea of what microtubules do, which they do, there's no debate, is that these proteins are able to walk. And so, an axon can be a meter long, right? There's a nerve that there's a neuron that goes from like your low back to your big toe, right? And so you're producing neurotransmitter in your low back, but that neurotransmitter is being released at your big toe. So you need a mechanism, you need a highway to shuttle neurotransmitter, and microtubules provide that highway for these proteins to walk down. And
so this protein is the yellow bone-looking thing standing on it?
Yep. And that blue ball is a ball filled with neurotransmitter or some other protein. And it's shuttled to the end of the neuron.
So is the microtubule actually like a conveyor belt, or is the protein actually has some motor function?
The protein walks, like literally. Those two little balls down there, they like take steps. The microtubule in this case is passive.
Even though the microtubule little chunks itself are constantly switching polarity and moving around. It's not a conveyor belt. Are you sure? I'm just like, man, that'd be hard to walk on.
I'm sure of nothing. I don't know. Like, we just don't know. It's hard. It's difficult to like emphasize how small these structures are. I mean, this picture in the top left.
But it would kind of make sense. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it would kind of make sense that if you started breaking down the ability for these microtubules to do this process where they polarize with each other geometrically and they're sort of just scattered, then there's no conveyance. And so the proteins can't then move along it and transmit the stuff.
It's cool because you're kind of mixing a mainstream explanation with like a heterodox explanation, because the mainstream explanation of why microtubules are important is if they disintegrate, these motor proteins can no longer walk down the neuron and the neuron stops working. And that obviously is critical to neuron function. But I like you're kind of like adding another element to it where this could also be the issue, is that you need this rapid changing of polarity in order for these proteins to walk. Your guess is as good as mine.
This stuff's happening in my brain. Don't know why it's happening.
None of us do, man.
This is so cool, though, dude. I just love this.
We're in the home stretch. Then I'll stop slide attacking everybody. So Hammeroff proposed this idea that microtubules are a suitable candidate for Penrose's theory, because Penrose is arguing that, it can't be computational. And I go into this in the book. Like, there are just certain aspects of consciousness and, if you believe in free will, that can't be algorithmically derived. And so there needs to be some other, he doesn't call it a receiver, but there needs to be some other structure that enables either quantum computation or, as others are kind of proposing, it needs to act like a receiver to some information source. And if you look at the tubulin dipoles, which are these little tubulin subunits, what better system for, each of these is like a little binary system, right? And, the question is, if they're entangled, now this is to call this speculative is like the biggest understatement of the year, but if they're entangled with some information source somewhere else, this kind of provides a mechanism for instantaneous information transfer. So if our brain is like an antenna, this is the antenna, because this is it could be an information transfer system, I guess, That's
really cool.
And so what's cool about that is you should be able to test that, right? Experimentally, it's not like the network theory. There are ways to test this, and people have tested it. So the first test is just a computer model, though. They showed that in computer simulations, anesthetics.
It's only a model.
What was that? Computer model. They showed that they resonate at 613 terahertz, these oscillations, these tubulin oscillations. And that terahertz peak, that 613 terahertz peak, disappears in the presence of anesthetic gases, but not controls, molecules that don't have an anesthetic function. So that's pretty cool. It's a computer model, but it's mechanistic. It's interesting. Then a guy at, I forget his name. I wish I had put his name in here, but a guy at Wellesley College found that if you gave rats a drug that binds to microtubules, anesthetics don't work as well in those mice.
Oh.
And this is like a super cool, super mechanistic study. Huge props to this guy because, he's got a control. Both groups are getting the same drug. But the drug that has a molecule competing for binding sites on microtubules, that group, anesthetics don't work as well. So at least in rats, it's pretty definitive evidence that anesthetics act on microtubules, which means microtubules are related to consciousness because anesthetics turn consciousness off. This is where, this is already over my head, but this is where it gets really over my head. There's this idea of delayed luminescence, which is that microtubules re-emit light after they're exposed to light. Now, this is obviously super interesting because photon entanglements, right? So the fact that light is harnessed by microtubules is just like a really cool idea. In that specifically it's the tryptophan networks that are responsible for delayed luminescence. Now, why this is important, I promised Carl I would mention this, is that DMT has a very similar structure to tryptophan. And so there's a proposition here that DMT sort of works the exact opposite way that anesthetics work, and that it somehow increases the resonant frequency of this antenna, this microtubule antenna.
I can believe that.
Pretty cool, right?
Wow. Hey, is it possible that these microtubules are, I mean, are they crystalline? What are they made of? Because I'm thinking like the re-emittance of light reminds me of piezoelectricity. So they're not charged. They don't have a charge. They're not positive or negative. But perhaps if they're stressed or flexed in some way, then they produce an electromagnetic field or an electromagnetic light.
The tubulin subunits themselves are nonpolar, but there are like the tryptophan residues and there are electrons that sort of become attached to the tubulin subunits and they become polar. So there is an electrical gradient across the molecule. So
everything is electric. I mean, I know that. Everything is electrical essentially. Like it all is.
I guess the idea is that the anesthetics somehow bind to the nonpolar region of the tubulin and does something to it, but I have no idea.
Huh.
This is like if I could study, if I could get a grant to study anything, it'd be this. But I can promise you, I won't get this grant ever. So.
All you grant writers out there, dude, get out your pen.
The problem is not the grant writers; it's the grant reviewers. This would not be at least a government-funded grant, but there's other idea. I'm really talking over my head at this point, but there's this idea of ultraviolet superradiance, which is that you have within these tubule networks, you have these mega tryptophan networks, and they've basically shown that you can have quantum effects in the tryptophan network, which was the biggest criticism of this theory, because the problem is quantum computation occurs at like absolute zero when we do it, right, in Silicon Valley. And so the idea is the brain is much too wet. There's much too warm and much too interparticle interaction for quantum computation to take place. But these guys demonstrated it. And I've read the paper. I have to take them at their word because I don't understand it. But I encourage other folks to read it. And then last one here, this might be my favorite, is that if you hit a microtubule with a laser, it retains light even after the laser is removed, unless the microtubule is exposed to anesthesia. And so somehow anesthesia interferes with the microtubule's ability to harness photons, which you could argue is sort of...
I guess I'm sorry. My question is, what does you mean by it retains light? Is it slowly releasing photons?
Yes.
Is that how they see? Okay.
It has like a luminescence.
Delayed release. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they call it delayed luminescence. It basically is like emitting light after you remove the light source.
So it can get charged up.
Yeah, it's like it takes the photons and there's some kind of prolonged interaction before it releases them. It's really cool.
And it's
or
like
re-emits.
Obviously they're never making the claim that they know what that means. They're just making the claim that the fact that anesthesia interrupts that process is like obviously cool. Like that's just so fast. Like
that is cool.
Why would anesthesia affect the ability of microtubules to retain light?
I'm stuck on this on the description of retaining light for some stupid reason, but basically I'm thinking that it's like they get it's not like there's light just like sitting in there waiting to get out. They are being energized in some way, and then as they go back to their normal state, they release a photon or something like that. Like they produce light, in other words. There's
probably a pretty like...
It's just like think about a glow in the dark stuff.
Yeah, it's just
It's not
that.
like storing light in there.
Sure,
It's that
sure.
the light gets
charges it up,
starts
excites
charging
it
it up.
yeah.
It excites the molecules. It excites the atoms. And so once you turn the lights out, now you're seeing that it's emitting light. It's not storing. Like, in other words, it's just transducing that light energy into motion, and then that is then producing more light. I'm just hung up on that. Sorry.
No. I think that's a better way of describing it. I mean, I'm sure there's a very like mundane mechanistic explanation. I think but the interesting point is just that anesthesia affects that process.
Yeah.
whatever.
So anesthesia does something to that where it can no longer store energy from light,
Exactly.
which is weird. It would be like, let's pour some or inject this glow in the dark bracelet with something, and now it won't glow for a while until the anesthesia is gone. Now it'll glow again. That's really strange.
Especially if the thing you're injecting turns consciousness off. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yes. Okay.
so it's like, what is it about this drug that turns consciousness off? Why it's doing something to the microtubules? Well, what are microtubules? Oh, they're these insane 613 terahertz oscillating binary systems that we can't explain. Oh, okay. Oh, and they emit light if you hit them with the laser. Like we don't know. It's just bananas. Which is,
And they're everywhere. I mean, they're
in every cell, but they're particularly complex in neurons. Yeah, and cortical neurons.
But the fact that they're in every cell makes it really interesting. Like, you know, your whole body maybe actually doing consciousness.
So what do you think about this?
This is you know, like the gut feeling,
Yep.
right? You know, you're thinking with your heart.
Yeah.
Or maybe some other parts.
You've got a million neurons in your GI system. So
Yeah.
It's kind of making me rethink acupuncture, bro, to be honest.
oh, okay. Wow, I wasn't expecting we go that would be the
You know
term.
what I'm saying? Like because they always say like, oh, it's connecting these like
Yeah.
there's these
this
certain
network.
pathways of
Yeah.
the network that all scientists are like, that network doesn't exist.
This is
Dude.
And then then they light some of them, like, you know, little
burn something
incense,
on it.
burn it, make it vibrate.
Add a little bit of heat to the needle.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
I think those are the implications, man. I think it's like we have all these old ideas, which include spirituality, religion. Like, okay, we're talking about structures that vibrate and somehow maybe transmit information and harness light. And if we turn those resonant structures off, we go to sleep. And so maybe they're tapping into like a field, a quantum field. Like, I don't know, man. That just sounds a whole lot like, here's the thing. I've been an atheist almost my whole life. And it's like, I think I have always had a good reason for that, because I'm reading these things and they don't strike me as logical. They're not mechanistic. There's no, I don't need to know the explanation. I just need it to be like possible that there is an explanation, right? For the soul, for example. But then you start reading these theories and it's like, oh, maybe there is a potential mechanism. You know what I mean? So I think the idea here is that science has kind of tried to establish itself as a worldview to explain the biggest questions. Why are we here? Who are we? Where do we come from? You know, and maybe it shouldn't do that, you know, because it's not a worldview. It's a method. It's a process. Yeah. And even though we are using it as a worldview, we're still ending up at these like quasi-spiritual explanations for how consciousness works. So I just think it's interesting. I think it's like, I hope it's a call for people to be, I don't know if I like the word open-minded either, but less certain in their beliefs, whatever they are.
Yeah. Fantastic.
That's awesome, man.
I don't think I convinced Kyle on the double slit experiment, but I think
Can we do a part 2?
Please, yeah, please.
Well, we're definitely going to do a Patreon.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, like this is cool. We should definitely do a part 2 as well.
Yeah. God's Eye View, people.
Awesome
Get it.
stuff.
I will put the links to the book in the show notes.
Can I plug some people from the Discord?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to say thank you. I've already mentioned him a few times, but Carl, because
Carl's great.
He turned me on to this idea. And then Cult of Soup actually he's a writing tutor in Tennessee, and he helps me publish my book. So thank you to him. And now Cult of Soup and I are now helping several other Discord members publish books.
Oh.
And they're actually doing some writing for us on a Substack. So I'm just going to plug it. Hemispheric Press.
Hemispheric Press.
Yes. And so, little brain hemisphere. And so we've got Cheese writing about King Arthur, and he's from England. So it's kind of cool. It's true English history. And we've got Carl writing about Neanderthal and Homo sapien hybridization and all sorts of cool stuff. And maybe, I don't know if it's pronounced Wanax or Wanex of the Pit, writing about Bronze Age stuff. So, yeah. And so I just want to say thanks to all those guys. It's been super fun learning about their ideas. And check out, I've got a podcast, Happy Fools, and a podcast, God's Eye View, about the book. So,
all right.
Awesome, man.
You send me those links. I'll put them in the show notes for
Awesome.
the Substack and the book and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, also a big thanks to all the people on the Discord, inspiring people and helping people out to develop their ideas. That's so freaking cool. I love that.
Yeah.
And
it is
very much appreciate it, you guys.
Kindest and most intelligent online community I've come across. So that's pretty cool. So good job, you guys. Something about your show is doing something to attract interesting people. So,
and it's also my band hammer.
yes.
What? I'm just saying. Sometimes I gotta wield the hammer, bro.
Oh, you do. You do. Yeah. Sometimes Dad has to come in there and lay down the law a little bit. That's fine.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much, man. This has been great. It's been fantastic. And again, to anyone who is interested in any of these ideas, want to read the Substack, want to check, I definitely recommend the book. There's a lot of physics, and it's exactly the kind of physics that we talk about on the show. Kyle and I argue about double slit experiment, but the kinds of physics that reach right out to the edge of understanding and sort of make you question the standard worldview is what's in the book. And then, of course, lots of the neuroscience stuff and some microtubules. All of this is in the book, so I definitely recommend reading it. I read it while in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, laying on the beach and in my hotel room. So it was was great.
Cool.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody will ever top that. That's pretty awesome. Well, thank you for reading it. I'm sure you do get requests to read stuff quite a bit. So that meant a lot. And I love the show. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, I mean,
big shout out to Laura. Honestly, she read the book first and then started pressuring us. Like, you guys got to do this. It's so good. So
shout out to her for sure. And then thank you for the blurb is great. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah. We got a Brothers of the Serpent blurb on the book. That's awesome.
Thank you for the blurb. Yeah, it was a great blurb too. Your blurb was the only blurb I didn't have to edit. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks,
and yes, Laura, I think I said this before the show, but my mom read the book, my wife read the book. They said, "Oh, it's great," but you just never know. They would lie. They would lie to my face no matter what I wrote. So it was very nice having a true third party read it and tell me it was good. So thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to join the Discord, you can find links to that on our website as well. If you want to join this community of people who are supporting each other and exploring the mysteries.
Yep.
brothersoftheserpent.com. All right. Patreon. Let's go to the Patreon.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
We love you.